Okay, I got a customer's car at the shop. It has some very serious challenges. 4-link, round tube chassis car, LS turbo. Let's walk through the challenges this car had and what we did to fix it. And let's talk more about what you need to look for when you're fabricating 4-link brackets and chassis brackets. Let's jump in. Okay, let me set the scene here real quick. First of all, I'm not going to share the customer's name, and I'm not going to show a picture of the customer's car. That's private. That's between me and the customer. I'm also not going to show you the car weights. I will show you the full 4-link plot. I'll show you all of the bracketry, all of the measurements we did. I'll show you where it came in, how it ended up, why I did what I did, how we corrected the problem so this guy could go out and make a hit. And I'll share his 60-foot time with you at the end. But guys, this is stuff that I come in contact with every day, whether it's remote tuning, in the shop tuning, and quite frankly, in the shop tuning is the absolute best way to go. Yes, it's a lot of work. But guys, that's really the only way you can truly see a car, map it out. I can scale it. I can look at it. We can put weight in it. We can look at pinion angle. We can check chassis squareness. These services include front end alignment, setting up the front shocks. But guys, let's walk through the challenges I had with this car. First of all, I'm going to show you some video from under the car, and I want to pause and do a quick voiceover and walk you through what was going on with this car. Now, I am also going to share with you all the details from my, I use Jerry Bickle's 4-link wizard. It is absolutely a great piece of software. And I'm going to share with you screenshots from this vehicle. And like I said, I'm not going to share with you who or anything like that. I'm not trying to break confidence with anyone. But this is important for you to understand, and you're going to see how my mind works, how I walk through this in relation to the wheelbase, the corner weights, in relation to the center of gravity. You will see how I approach this car, and we'll go from there. So let's switch over. I want to show you some video from under the car, and I'm going to do a quick voiceover while we go through that, and then we're going to come back here and talk more. Let's get going. Okay, here I am under the car, and very first thing is pinion was level. We ended up with 2.5 degrees of pinion angle when this car was done. Big gotcha right here. There was less than 1/2 of an inch of clearance between the drive shaft and the top of the tunnel. That was not going to work. All right, these are 33 by 16.5 stiff side wall, 15-inch Hoosiers. That's important to note, 33-inch tall tire. Just letting you see some of the bracketry and stuff that I'm looking at. This is 3/16" steel. This is not 1/4 inch. All right, there was an issue. I could not use above this bolt hole because the hind joints would hit the back of the bracket. So the bolts above this have been wasted. We can't use them. Another thing here, check this out. We have several holes that are oblong. These holes are not round anymore. And the guys, that's a sign of power overcoming the bracketry. Not safe, okay? Here's just a view of the driver's side chassis bracket. This is a Dana 60. Want to notice it's running QA1 DDs. These are 12-inch long, 95-pound linear rate springs from QA1. These are off-the-shelf DD501s. These shocks are too collapsed for a big tire, and these shocks are not sufficient for a turbo car making over 1,000 horsepower. They are not the right shocks for this car. They just don't have the valving to control a car with this much power. And the DDs are not revalvable. You cannot revalve these. All right, now check this out. Very important thing to catch here. Nice steel braided hose, but the steel braided hose on both sides runs through the lower top 4-link bracket. Guys, this is a no, no, no. I can't use the hole for one thing, but if something were to happen with rotation and this rips your brake line off, that's a problem. The brake lines should be floating. They should not be running through holes in your 4-link brackets, okay? All right, look at this from the side. Here's the side view. I want you to understand, look at some of this geometry. This is how the car came in. Now, I'm going to show you how it came in. Bottom bar was going down, I think, almost 7 degrees. And the top bar was down, I think, almost 10 or 12 degrees. This is exactly how the car came into the shop. So let's jump in and talk more about this. All right. Okay, here is the actual plot from the software of how the car came into the shop. This is the general, 4-link plot. I'm going to show you more of the rear end brackets and the chassis brackets and the chassis measurements here in just a second. But this is how the car came in. And I'm looking at my screen. I'm sorry I'm not looking at you right now, but bear with me. 47 inch instant center length and 2.5 inches off the ground is how it came in. Lower bar angle is 7 degrees down. Upper bar angle was 20 degrees down. And this put the car with an anti-squat value of 32.9. Now, it's important to understand, as you've seen, this is a big tire slick car, so I'm not going to be running more than 100% anti-squat on this car. It's a very strong motor, turbo car, so I mean, we're going to end up with less than 100% anti-squat because it's a big tire car. But it's important that you see this is how the car came in. Some very good data here. You can see the number of holes on the bracket and everything. You can see where the current bars are. On the bottom left here, you can see the center of gravity is 16.625 inches off the ground. You can see how far back the center of gravity is on the car. We have you might as well call that a 50-inch center of gravity length there. And let's keep going. Okay, here on this screen, this is the 4-link wizard plot of the rear end brackets. Like I said, guys, this is me measuring from each bolt hole to the ground, measuring the distance from each bolt hole to the next, measuring in front of the axle center line. This is showing the upper hole coordinates. Over here on the right hand side, there's 3 upper holes. There were 3 lower holes, and like I said before, the number 1 hole on the top bar I can't use, had a brake line running through it. You can see that from the center line of the axle to the track is 16.5 inches. That was with 9 pounds of air pressure in the slick on both sides. And you can see the bottom bolt hole, number 1 bolt hole there for the bottom bar is 8.25 inches from the ground. Now, of course, I have the car on blocks. My blocks are 10 3/4 inches high, and the garage is level. We made sure the car is level. So when I measure from the hole to the ground, obviously to put numbers in here, you have to subtract 10 3/4 from whatever number you measure. And I have a solid ruler, not a flimsy ruler. We have several rulers that we've cut, and they're better and they're accurate so that I know the ruler is level and I'm not tilting or anything like that. I mean, you want to be accurate. You didn't have to be crazy accurate, but you want to be accurate. But here you can see this is the rear end brackets and the data and how far forward you are from the center line of the axle and things such as that. So this is the rear end bracket. Now let's go and take a look at the chassis bracket. Okay, here we have the chassis bracket, and what you see here is we have 8 holes for the top bar, and we have 6 holes for the lower bar. And over here I'm showing you the coordinates for the upper bar, and you can see how those coordinates track. Now, it's important to understand that the number one bottom bar is 5 inches off the ground. This is not how the car came into the shop, by the way. This is how the car left the shop. But just so you can see, these are where all these measurements go. And this is me putting data into the 4-link wizard. And this is the chassis bracket. And remember now, some of these holes are oblong, and we'll see here in a minute. I think 5, 6, 7, and 8, or maybe 6, 7, and 8 I could not use. The heim joint is, they had very good, strong chrome moly heim joints in, but the head of the heim joint was too thick to get up to the holes. It would hit the bracket, and you couldn't use those holes. And then some of the holes, as we've shown in the other opening video, are oblong. So these are things I disclose to the customer. These are things we talk about. I included in the email. I make sure all this is documented so that you understand what we're talking about here. But this is the chassis side of the measurements. Okay, the third and final screen that I use to put data into the 4-link wizard is the chassis specs. And from here, I have the weights hidden. I'm not going to reveal the weights of this car, but you can see the percentages. It has 50, might as well call that 51% on the rear, 49% on the front. You can also see it has a 101-inch wheelbase. The center line of the axle to the center line of the lower bolt hole on the chassis bracket is 19 inches. And like I said, we're 16.5 inches from the center line of the axle to the track. And that was with right at 9 pounds of air pressure in both rear slicks. And we had 38 to 40 pounds in both front tires. Now at this point, we haven't done a front end alignment yet. But this is just getting the data put in and all of this. To give you some information, this car got to the shop about 1:30 Friday. And we spoke for about an hour, hour and a half. And then I had to leave that Friday night and go out to dinner with my wife and some friends. So the video that you see in the beginning was me just getting the car on blocks, kind of getting myself acclimated with the car so that while I was out eating dinner, I could be kind of thinking about what's my next move, what's going on. I wound up so concerned about this car because he needed to pick the car up the next day around noon so that he could go out and hopefully do some testing. I was so concerned about this car, I got back to the shop around 10:30 that night. And then I worked on the car until 5 a.m. And guys, it was shortly after that episode I began to get really weak and sick, and then ended up with COVID. I think I just overdid it and got my immune system down. But then got finished at 5 a.m., went home, got a couple hours of sleep, got back to the shop around, I think, 8 a.m., and then we had to align the front end. And then the customer got there and he was able to take the car out. But these are the measurements, the real world measurements of what we did. Now, let's talk a little bit more about how we got the bars finally set up. So it's important to understand the ride height in this picture is 5 inches. So from the bottom hole to the track on the bottom chassis hole bracket is 5 inches. That's not how the car came in. So let's go back to the picture of how the car came in. Okay, once again, here's how the car came into the shop. It had a 4-inch chassis height. And take a look at this, guys. Take a look at how high, how tall the rear end is. The brackets the bottom hole on the rear end bracket is almost in line with the bottom hole of the top bar on the chassis. Okay, and I understand back in the day with big tires, it wasn't uncommon for guys to run a bottom bar with a downhill angle. And when I say downhill, I mean from the rear end to the chassis, a downhill angle. And there's a lot of guys who still subscribe to that, and they say, well, when you run a big tire slick, you got to have some downward angle so the car will squat And if you put any type of separation in the big tire slick, you're just going to destroy the sidewall and ball it up. Well, I understand squat, but guys, this had 33% anti-squat. This is ridiculous. Now, I don't think this car was set up and built for a 33-inch tall slick. Let me show you a picture of how this car would look with a 28 or 29-inch tire, and then you can see the difference. Okay, here's a picture of a 29-inch tire. That's, if let's say this car had a 29-inch tire on it, and this does show a chassis height of 5 1/4 inches, but we could have still ended up at 5 inches. Even with it at 5 1/4 inches, I now have a 0-degree bottom bar angle. And I have a 60-inch instant center length, and it's 6 1/4 inches off the ground. Look at how much better this setup looks. This is in balance. I have some good spread up and down on the bottom bar. I can bring the bottom bar up closer to the axle center line if I need to. I can have a little downhill angle. I can have uphill angle on the bars. I got good adjustability on the top 4-link bar. You know, I mean, now this is still set up for a slick. A radial setup would be a little bit different. And just quite frankly, a radial setup, I'm gonna have the brackets up on the chassis more than this, because on a radial setup, I'm trying to get the instant center height to compete with the center of gravity height and push the nose of the car down while I'm trying to put separation in the back. So there's a good subscriber of mine, Eddie Travis, who runs a Camaro with a 632, and he actually had to relocate his chassis brackets after watching my videos to get the car to hook. The chassis brackets were just too low in the car. And for some reason, a lot of the older chassis I see tend to have the chassis brackets too low in the chassis with the big tires and things that we have available today. This is how the car probably was set up for a small tire car, and with obviously a little bit more ride height. Obviously a 4-inch ride height with how the car came in was just entirely too low. I mean, the slicks were way up in the fender, and I don't think there was a whole lot of room between the slick and the fender wells with a 4-inch chassis height. So we were going to have to bring that up anyways. But this is likely how this chassis was meant to be used, a 28 or 29-inch slick, not a 33-inch tall slick. So that's important, guys. If you know you're going to be running a certain size tire, that impacts the distance from the axle center line to the track, and you need to take that into account when you fabricate the rear end brackets and the holes, so that you have some geometry and you have options to move these around. Now, I'm not going to sit here and get into how big a bolt hole you should have or the spacing. There's a lot of good stuff out there. 10 Soldier race cars, Marilat Racing. You know, there's a lot of people out there who have some very cool adjustable 4-link brackets so that you can move these bars in 1/16 or 1/18 of an inch increments. Now, most of the racers I deal with don't have those kind of budgets, and we make do with what we have. Most of the 4-link holes I deal with are 1/2 inch or 5/8, and there's usually a 1 inch or 1 1/4 inch spread between the holes. And while that's not a lot of adjustability, we can usually get the car straight. We can usually get the anti-squat where we want it and get the car launching. But this is likely how this chassis was meant to be built. Okay, let's talk more about this. This is how the car left the shop. We ended up taking the chassis ride height to 5 inches, and I ended up putting the bottom bar on the rear end in the number 1 hole. The bottom bar on the chassis went to the number 4 hole, and if you notice, that gave me a negative, you might as well call that a 1 degree negative downhill. Okay, I shoot for 0 or just a tad above or below 0 degrees of bottom bar angle. That's just where I normally start my baseline. I generally start with the bottom bar in the lower hole because the center of gravity of this car was pretty low. I want a big tire slick to be a little lower on the center of gravity, so that bottom bar helps gets me the height. You notice, now this was not the instant center length I wanted. This ended up with a 47 7/8 instant center length and 7.599 inches off the ground. I was wanting closer to 55 to 56 inches of instant center, but I didn't want to get too far in front of the center of gravity with a big tire slick. So if you look at what's going on here, you might as well call that 2 inches behind the center of gravity. So I was okay with that. The car ended up with 96.5% anti-squat. Now, let me tell you, remember, there's wasted motion above and below the anti-squat line. And sometimes you need that motion to make things work, obviously. But this car, I doggone near ended up on the neutral line, which means most of your energy is going to push all of your energy is going to be pushing the car forward. But with a big tire slick, you do have to introduce a little bit of shock compression to get the weight over the slick without trying to separate the slick and crush the slick. Now, this is a big tire car, not a small tire car. This car primarily is going to be ran on semi-prep to prep tracks. This is not a no-prep big tire car. So that's important to understand as well. But this is exactly how the car left the shop when it went out. And when this car went out and went testing on, I think they were still tuning, they were still setting up the motor. The third pass the guy made on this car and launched it still soft, but putting a little power to it off the hit. The car ran a 118 60 foot. And he was very happy with that. I'm very pleased with that. There's a lot left in it. Now, what I told him is what I would like to do is get that brake line out of that hole and take the top bar and move it down one hole on the rear end, which would put me right at 54 inches of instant center length. And that would have given me about 89 to 90 on the anti-squat. Now let's pause for a minute because I made a pretty strong comment about QA1 DD501s. Let's pause for a minute and let me explain why I said what I said for the DD501s. I want to make sure I do the right thing by QA1. Okay guys, here's what I want to break down. You know, yeah, I use Penske, but I'm going to tell you, I have success with Penske. I have success with AFCO. I have success with Mincer. I have success with Kinetic Energy. I have success with Santufs. I mean, there are a lot of good shock options out there. I've had race cars with tremendous success with the QA1 mod series. The DD series shock, they're good shocks, but I see them more as a hot street shock. When you start getting into, 800, 900 horsepower and above, and we start launching cars like we have the ability to launch cars today, a DD501 is not the shock you should be looking at. You really need to be thinking about a shock that has more advanced valving, more size on the pistons, more care on the detents and everything like that. Generally, we're going to be talking about a shock that has gas pressure on it so that we can control cavitation on the fluid on the compression side. And with the horsepower levels we have today, and I have shock videos that I've talked about this, you're going to have some pretty strong and advanced valving to dyno graphs and adjustability. It's not uncommon to need a shock at this kind of horsepower level where you may need 12 to 1400 pounds of resistance on the extension. And you may need, more compression valving to keep the tire planted or whatever. On a big tire slick car, that extension valving and being able to control and not crush the sidewall of a big tire slick is absolutely critical. in making sure you have the right anti-squat and the instant center length and in the relation to the height of the center of gravity, then that's important to understand that the shock has to be able to control the car. That's very important. Now, I also pointed out that the shocks were too compressed. There's not enough shock sticking out of the body to allow this big tire car to squat. So we ended up having to extend the shocks, reset the coil springs. It had 95-pound coil springs. I'm not going to tell you how much they were compressed because then you can figure out the rear weight. But he had great compression on the springs. The springs were good. I wasn't concerned about them being too stiff or too soft. But the shocks were too collapsed. Because on a big tire car like that, the last thing you want to do is bottom the shock out. You think about the chassis that's coming over a big tire car and compressing the shock, and if it bottoms the shock out, first of all, you can damage the shock. You can cause the shock to leak, hurt the seals. But think about that. When you bottom the shock out, what's taking the load? What are you now abusing? It's the sidewall. And when you bottom a shock out, it's like it's stiff. Now the only thing you can do is crush the sidewall of the slick. You're going to wad the slick up. You're going to cup the slick. It's going to go into violent tire shake, and your run is over. You cannot bottom a shock out. You do not want to top a shock out. You got to have the shock installed height set up correctly for your car. And on a big tire slick car, we're going to shoot for probably middle of the shock travel because I need to have some compression to move the weight over the car without crushing the sidewall. Now let's pause and talk a little bit about the front end of this car and some of the challenges I have with the front end. I'm not going to show pictures of the front of the car because then you can identify the car. But this car came in with single adjustable strange struts. Very nice setup. Very good front end. We ended up with nearly 0 degrees of camber and about 5.5 to 6 degrees of caster with a 1/16 inch of a toe in. It had a good bump steer kit on it. The rack and everything and the articulation of the front end was good. It didn't have a lot of bump steer as the front end lifted. But the shocks were probably 12 to 15 years old. And one of the shocks adjustment was broken. It had froze up and was broken. I don't even know where the front shock was on the driver's side because the adjustment was broken. On the passenger side, because I didn't know where that shock was, I just put it in the middle. Guys, these are things that, I'm guessing at. So we did set the right height and all that. We did get the front end aligned. But, here again, he went out and made a 118 60-foot pass. Okay, so in this situation, we made the best with what we had. I'm going to want shocks that have some good valving to not crush the sidewall on the extension rate. I'm wanting a little softer compression. On these shocks, where did we put the shocks? All right, these are DD501s. There's no way in the world the extension valving in these DD501s are going to hold this car when he really begins to go out and try to launch it, especially with, around 96% anti-squat. There's absolutely no way that I would run this car more than 100% anti-squat with big tire slicks and QA DD501. On the compression, I started the compression clicks at 6. On both sides. Both coil springs were level. I had good compression on both coil springs. When I was done, I had almost 2.25 inches of shock compression travel and about that same amount of travel on the extension. I just kind of split it in the middle on the shock because it was only a 5-inch travel shock. And I was somewhat concerned about the shock still extending. However, I just locked those valvings down, which on a DD501 is still nowhere near as strong as a custom Mincer or Penske or an AFCO, Big Gun or anything like that. But it's what I had. And that's where we set the shocks for him to go out and do the hit. So, guys, I just want to say that this is exciting work for me, but this is challenging work when cars are built for one setup and people are doing things different. If I could have, I would have put them in a 32-inch tall slick. Even that half an inch from the center line to the ground is going to help the geometry of the car, and I'm going to have more opportunity to adjust my instant center length. That top bar, when you look at how the car left with the top bar, that's still a little more top bar angle than I want. That's why I really wanted to bring the top bar on the rear end down one hole. Also, the further you get the top bar away from the axle center line, the more violent that top bar is acting on the chassis. I mean, guys, think about this. On the bottom bar is being pushed into the chassis because of the rotational pitch of the rear end. The bottom bar is being compressed into the chassis, and the top bar is trying to be ripped out of the chassis. Now you think about that. You think about when that rear end twists and those tires drive and that pinion begins to twist, and you think about the forces that are going on, the opposing forces that are happening. So I generally like to have the top 4-link bar closer to the axle center line, the bottom 4-link bar further away from the center line, and then I have options on how to play with that. For a QA DD501, a 48 instant center length is too short. A 55 instant center length would have helped those DD501s, but when he gets more advanced valving in his shocks, then we can probably play around with this a little bit more. I was pretty happy with the height of the instant center in comparison to the center of gravity for a big tire slick car. But now remember, if you're running radials, you're really trying to get the height of the instant center to overcome the center of gravity of the car. You're really trying to push the front of the car down and bring obviously as much separation as you can and keep the radial planted. And there's only one way to do that, and that's bracket location and getting your bars correctly in location so that you're overcoming the center of gravity. On a big tire slick car, you're working under the center of gravity. You're intentionally trying to introduce a little bit of squat in the car and control the big sidewalls of the big tire. This is interesting stuff. There's no hard rule for every car. Every car is unique. And I hope this video is helping you see some of the real world challenges and things like that. If you're fabricating brackets today, you need to think about how this picture looks. You need to think about having the chassis, and you don't weld anything on your chassis until you know the rear end height, what size tires, what size wheels, how is that rear end going to be set up in that chassis? What's your center of gravity height? How far is the crankshaft from the ground? And then you start measuring. I have a video that tells you how to measure the height of your center of gravity. I will make sure it's in the description below. But those are key things to understand before you do any welding on the chassis side of the brackets. And then those placements need to be in line. If your chassis brackets are way higher than your rear end, you got a problem for slicks. If your chassis brackets are way lower, like this car came in, you got some pretty severe challenges. So, balance. You're looking for balance here on the rear end brackets to the chassis brackets and how you get adjustability into that. So I was somewhat pleased with how the car left. It did end up an inch higher than it came in, which actually worked out. We had to end up with 2.5 degrees of pinion angle. Like I said, when the car came into the shop, there was no pinion angle. The pinion and drive shaft were already in line. We ended up pretty much dropping the entire rear end out of this car. And I do not disconnect brake lines. I'm not going to get involved with brakes unless you and I have that discussion and we talk about that up front. But every bar was off this car. We had the chassis supported on stands, and we had the rear end pretty much out of the car hanging. I had to reset the anti-roll bar, and what we did with that was, with me in the car, we set the anti-roll bar neutral and then 1/2 turn more on the right rear just to help with chassis load. Now, I did end up adding some preload in the 4-link, and on the rear end, the weights ended up around 75 pounds more on the driver left rear tire than the right rear tire. And that's with me in it, anti-roll bar, everything. We set the car up with 75 pounds more on the left rear than the right rear. And we do that because the natural tendency at these power levels is for the chassis twisting to plant the right rear tire harder, which drives the car to the left. So we compensate with that by adding a little more weight on the left rear, and I think it was 1.5 flats from neutral on the top right bar got me to 75 pounds. And we had the rear end square. We had no rear steer in the car. I didn't feel like the car needed any rear steer. The chassis was solid. The welds looked great. Some of the tubing, some of the bracketry were thin because that's just the age of this chassis. Everything ended up well on that car. So hopefully this video helps you. Hopefully it makes more sense. I'm sorry I didn't get on the whiteboard, but this video is getting a little long. I'll do some more whiteboard stuff here soon and kind of talk more about this. But this is a real world example, guys. And I appreciate you taking the time to watch. Let me know what questions you have. And remember, when it comes to all of this, we're trying to do 3 things. We're trying to go fast, we're trying to go straight, and we're trying to be safe.